do you think mental health and well-being was exacerbated by remote working, or did it create a whole new set of challenges that had never been discussed before? Just curious your experience.
Yeah, such an interesting question. And I think in some ways we're still figuring that out a little bit in terms of what does the research show around that. I will say that I think there's much greater awareness. I think personally, I mean, remote work is a bit of a touchy issue, but to me, I mostly work with people in larger firms, and those people that did not have a basis for connection relationships that were in person, so people who are on the earlier end of their careers, I do think have had some negative impacts in terms of well-being from being remote, and not just from being remote, but from, let's say, for example, receiving many of their assignments by email as opposed to in person or over the phone, right? So I do think that there are some things that have impacted that. It so depends on what your work environment is, though. I grew up in upstate New York. My dad and my brother run a regional law firm together. And I don't know that work environment has changed as much. They're still very much in person, and I think a lot of things have remained the same. So I do think it depends on what work your environment, but remote work is, I still think it is a mixed bag for people.
Yeah. Joan, I wanted you to chime in on this because, like Tara just alluded to, right? I mean, there was lawyer burnout before the pandemic, but then you had remote capacity, and it's a whole new ball game. So we know that mental health and addiction are two significant problems for the legal community. But when you add in remote work, have there been other challenges developing for attorneys when it comes to well-being that you've seen in your experience, issues people are dealing with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of things that people really came to us with. One was kind of much more big picture, which was as there were actual threats to one's survival. Do I want to do this?
Yeah.
Is this what I want my legacy to be? And so a lot of people were really questioning and looking at doing some soul searching and introspection and meeting with counselors and attending careers groups and attending well-being groups and things like that to sort of figure some of those things out. But then in addition, we saw that, people who were introverts had struggled in a traditional environment. Now it was the people who were extroverts that were struggling. And so the introverts suddenly had something to offer. And so I think that leveled the playing field in some ways if people were willing to listen to each other.
Interesting.
I think there was, newer lawyers were mentioned. And there's also a concept that we really saw a lot of and we still talk about, which is anticipatory grief. And of course, some of us lost people during COVID, and Robin and I both live in the community where George Floyd was killed, and so there's grief around those kinds of things. But sure. Anticipatory grief is something more about, what am I missing? What did I plan on, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get it? You're told, you're given all these benchmarks, all of these suggestions for connections. Here's how you're going to advance your career. Here's how you're going to meet people within your law firm or other organization. Here's how you're going to succeed. And yet here you are thinking that, well, you might be walking down the hall and you could look and see if the partner you wanted to touch base with seemed to be, open to it. You're not going to do that with an email or a Teams reach out. And so that was missing. And people grieved that thing that was missing. And I don't know that we even quite realized that that's what we're doing. And so that something's missing, I'm not succeeding, I'm not meeting goals, I'm not meeting my own expectations, rising to the level of imposter syndrome. We saw a lot of that. And to a certain extent, there still is. And so those are a couple of the trends that I think we observed.